You think you lose control when you snap, when you shout, when you relapse, when you break your own rules. But that's not the moment. That's just the evidence. The real moment was quieter, earlier, and you missed it. Most people spend their entire lives reacting to the explosion and never asking about the spark. They apologize after the outburst. They feel shame after the relapse. They promise to do better after the breakdown, and then they do it again, not because they're weak, not because they lack willpower, but because they keep looking in the wrong direction. The explosion isn't the problem. It's the report. A summary of decisions already made, choices already accepted, lines already crossed, quietly, invisibly, days before anything visible happened. And until you understand that, you will keep fighting the wrong battle. Control doesn't disappear all at once. It erodes, silently. You tell yourself, just this once. You delay something small. You ignore a signal. You negotiate with something that shouldn't be negotiable. And nothing dramatic happens. No alarm, no consequence, no immediate pain. So you assume you're still in control. But you're not. You've already started losing it. Here's what makes this so dangerous. The erosion feels like nothing. It doesn't feel like failure. It feels like flexibility, like being reasonable with yourself, like giving yourself a break you probably deserve. That's the trap. Because the mind is very good at reframing surrender as wisdom, at calling avoidance rest, at calling distraction recovery, at calling the slow drift away from your own standards self-compassion. And none of it feels wrong in the moment. That's exactly the point. If it felt wrong, you'd stop. But it doesn't. It feels almost right, almost reasonable, almost fine. And that almost is where control dies. The dangerous part is how normal it feels. There's no emotional spike, no panic. Just a slight shift, a soft compromise. You scroll a little longer. You avoid a difficult thought. You postpone a decision. Not because you can't act, but because you don't want to feel what comes with acting. And in that moment, you don't lose control. You trade it for comfort. That's the deal. Every time. Comfort now, consequence later. And the mind accepts it, eagerly, because the consequence is always abstract, always future, always someone else's problem. The discomfort of acting is immediate, real, present. The cost of not acting is distant, theoretical, easy to ignore, so the brain chooses comfort every time you let it. And slowly, without drama, the gap between who you are and who you intended to be grows wider. Not from one big betrayal, from 1,000 small ones, each one forgiven, each one forgotten, each one invisible until they're not. The Stoics never trusted intensity. They didn't wait for emotional breakdowns to examine themselves. They didn't measure their character by how they performed under pressure. They paid attention to the smallest movements, because they understood something most people spend a lifetime ignoring. You don't collapse under pressure. You collapse under permission. Permission you gave yourself days ago, maybe weeks. Marcus Aurelius didn't write about grand battles. He wrote about the morning, about the resistance to getting out of bed, about the pull toward comfort when duty called. He understood that the war isn't fought in the arena. It's fought in the first 5 minutes of the day, when no one is watching, when nothing is at stake yet, when you could easily choose comfort and call it rest. He wrote about guarding the mind, not controlling outcomes, not controlling others, but watching, carefully, what you allow inside. Because once something enters unchallenged, it doesn't stay small. It settles. It becomes familiar. And familiar things stop feeling like threats. That's how permission works. Not as a single decision, as a slow normalization. Epictetus said something sharper. He said the first and greatest task of a human being is to distinguish what is in their power from what is not. Most people apply that outward, to outcomes, to other people, to circumstances. But the real application is inward. What you allow yourself to think, what you allow yourself to feel without examining. What you allow yourself to do, once, twice, until it becomes pattern. That's your territory. That's what's in your power. And every time you let something pass unchallenged, every small compromise, every quiet negotiation, every just this once, you are surrendering territory that belongs to you. Not to circumstances, not to weakness, to permission, your own. Modern psychology confirms this. Your brain doesn't operate on dramatic decisions. It runs on patterns, micro-behaviors, tiny approvals. Think of it this way. Every time you act against your own standard and justify it, you're not just making an exception, you're sending a signal. Deep in the architecture of how your mind works, something registers. This is acceptable now, not as a thought, as a setting. And the next time that situation appears, the resistance is slightly lower. The justification comes slightly faster. The discomfort is slightly smaller. Not because you're weaker, but because you trained yourself to be. Repetition doesn't just build skill, it builds permission. Every behavior you repeat, including avoidance, becomes easier, more automatic, less visible. Until one day, you look at yourself and don't recognize the distance between where you are and where you meant to be. And you call it losing control. But it wasn't lost. It was handed over. Gradually, willingly, one small moment at a time. So here's the part most people avoid. You didn't lose control. You participated in losing it. You signed off on every step. Not consciously, but consistently. You knew. At some level, you always knew. There was a moment, there's always a moment, where you could have said no, where you felt the slight resistance, that quiet signal, that almost imperceptible hesitation, and you ignored it because it was easier, and now you call the result lack of control. But it wasn't lack, it was accumulation. And here's what makes that hard to sit with. It means the story you've been telling yourself isn't accurate. The story where you're someone who just snaps sometimes, where you're someone who struggles with discipline, where control is something that happens to you, something you have or don't have, like a trait you were born with or without. That story is comfortable because it removes responsibility. If control is a trait, you can't be blamed for lacking it. If you just snap, the snap is the problem, not the 1,000 quiet moments before it. But if the real moment is earlier, if it's in the small decisions nobody sees, then the responsibility is yours, entirely. And that's not a comfortable place to stand, but it's the only place from which something actually changes. So where is the real moment? It's not in the breakdown. It's here, earlier, subtle, almost invisible. It's the second you hesitate before doing what you know is right. It's the instant you soften your standards just enough to make discomfort disappear. That's where control lives and dies. If you want it back, you don't wait for the next big test. You train in the smallest ones, not in the moments that feel important, in the ones that feel irrelevant. Because those are the real training ground, the moments nobody sees, the decisions that don't seem to matter, the small resistances you override before anyone, including you, notices. That's where the pattern is built, or broken. You respond to the quiet signals before they become loud ones. You act before emotion builds, not after it peaks. You stop waiting to feel ready, motivated, clear, because readiness is a consequence of action, not a condition for it. And you stop negotiating with yourself, not because negotiation is always wrong, but because some lines, once you start negotiating them, stop being lines at all. They become suggestions. And suggestions are easy to ignore. Control isn't loud. It's precise. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't require intensity or drama or visible struggle. It's built in moments nobody sees, in decisions nobody applauds, in the quiet choice to hold a standard when everything in you wants to let it slide just this once. You don't prove control when everything is hard. You prove it when it's easy to slip, when no one would notice, when the cost seems small, when the justification is already forming in your mind. That's the real test, not the crisis, the quiet. And most people never train for the quiet. They prepare for the hard moments. They brace for the obvious temptations. They build systems for the visible battles. But the quiet moments don't announce themselves. It's when you open your phone instead of doing what you planned, when you delay a decision you already made, when you choose comfort, knowing somewhere it will cost you later. Nothing dramatic, nothing worth mentioning, just a small door left open, and those doors add up. So next time, watch closely. Not for the explosion, for the whisper, the small moment that feels irrelevant, the slight shift that seems harmless, the almost nothing that you almost let pass. That's where it begins. That's where you either hold the line or quietly lose it again. And the question that stays, the one that doesn't leave when this ends, is not whether you understand this. You do. It's whether you'll feel the whisper before it becomes the explosion, whether you'll catch yourself in the ordinary moment, the forgettable one, the one that doesn't feel like anything, because that's the only one that ever mattered.